Everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today we're diving deep into a name that sends chills down your spine and sparks endless morbid curiosity: Adolf Hitler. No matter where you're from or how much you know about wars, if someone asks you to name history's biggest real-life villains, Hitler is definitely making that list. This guy went from humble beginnings to becoming the absolute dictator of one of Europe's most powerful nations. And what followed? The most destructive war humanity has ever seen, and a genocide of unimaginable proportions. His name is hard to forget, and the scars he left behind will take even longer to heal. To really get how catastrophic he was, simply condemning him as a monster isn't enough. That'd be too easy, and honestly, history has already done that. Today, we're doing something different. We're going to break down his journey chronologically, exploring the forces that shaped him and the weird, disturbing twists that paved his road to ruin. This is the story of a predicted downfall, from the seeds of resentment to his unstoppable hunger for limitless power. Our story kicks off at the very beginning, long before he became the shadow of his cursed legacy. Adolf Hitler was born on the 20th of April, 1889, in Braunau am Inn, a small Austrian town right on the German border. His dad, Alois Hitler, was a customs official with a pretty authoritarian vibe and was rarely home. Like many absent fathers, he was married 3 times. His third wife, Clara Pölzl, was 23 years younger and basically smothered young Adolf with attention, especially after his younger siblings died. Some biographers say this super close relationship with his mom, combined with his dad's strictness, was a huge factor in his psychological development. It made him feel special, but also, paradoxically, super insecure. Experts think Adolf felt special because of his mom's suffocating love, but also unwanted by his dad. The thing is, lots of people go through similar stuff, and they don't turn into genocidal maniacs. In his early school years, first in Fischeln and then in Leonding, near Linz, his grades were pretty mediocre, except for drawing and, surprisingly, history. His history teacher, Leopold Poetsch, taught Pangermanic and anti-Semitic ideas that reportedly made a big impression on young Adolf. This below-average student with artistic dreams and clear desires was a rare bird. Early on, he showed signs of the brokenness that would define his adult life. He had artistic ambitions that were actually pretty mediocre below his own supposed talent, but this resentment, it would make him explosive later on. That came after his dad died in 1903, when Hitler was just 13. With the suffocating figure who caused him so much fear and insecurity gone, the paternal authority was out of the picture. While it seemed like a relief, it brought another conflict. He could now focus more on his artistic dreams, much to his mother's dismay, who wanted him to become a civil servant like his dad. Moving to Linz fueled his artistic aspirations even more. It was a refuge for a young guy who felt out of place and misunderstood. And there's nothing more dangerous than the resentment of someone who believes they have a natural talent. In 1907, with his mom's financial help, Hitler moved to Vienna, the cosmopolitan capital of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, hoping to get into the prestigious Academy of Fine Arts. His desire was genuine, but his talent? Not exactly groundbreaking compared to other artists of his time. He failed his first admission attempt and got hit even harder when he was rejected a second time in 1908. The examiners thought his architectural drawings were okay, but his human figure drawings, not so much. It might sound too poetic or philosophical now, but it's wild to think that Hitler, a man seen as an insensitive monster incapable of showing humanity, was once a young aspiring artist who couldn't draw human figures. It's like he just couldn't grasp what people are really like, what they want, feel, or represent. Things got even worse when his beloved mother died of breast cancer in December 1907 at 47 years old. This just deepened his isolation and bitterness. A strange tidbit from this time is that the doctor who treated his mom with compassion until the very end was Dr. Eduard Bloch, a Jewish doctor from Linz. Hitler apparently expressed deep gratitude to him, even calling him noble. Decades later, in one of the few bizarre acts of personal consideration amidst the Holocaust, Hitler reportedly made sure Bloch could safely emigrate to the United States. But these are rare glimpses of the young man behind the monster. They don't show any real benevolence. We're not here to celebrate Hitler. We're here to remember him for who he truly was. Without his mother's support, and with his artistic dreams crushed, he plunged into poverty as a young man. He survived on odd jobs, selling watercolors and postcards of Viennese landscapes and living in homeless shelters. It was in this environment that he soaked up the toxic ideologies brewing in Vienna, the pan-Germanic nationalism of George von Schonemer, the anti-Semitic populism of Mayor Karl Lueger, and various racial and occult theories. He spent hours devouring books at the Hofburg Palace Library, a self-taught man with sinister intentions, building a distorted and resentful worldview to avoid mandatory Austrian military service, which he despised for its multi-ethnic nature. Hitler fled to Munich in 1913. This just showed his cowardice and the danger of spreading radical ideas. In Munich, Hitler found a more Germanic refuge, an environment he considered more consistent with his views. But even in a place he felt more at home, his life didn't change much. He continued his marginal life as a painter until August 1914, when World War I broke out. For Hitler, it was a liberation. He enthusiastically enlisted in the 16th Bavarian Reserve Infantry Regiment, known as the List Regiment. He dropped his paintbrush, put away his watercolors, and packed the rhetoric he'd absorbed years earlier into his war baggage. This new chapter of war offered him a purpose, camaraderie, and a structure he'd never found before. He served as a Meldegänger, a dispatch runner on the Western Front, a dangerous job that constantly exposed him to enemy fire in France and Belgium. I know history loves to fantasize about finding Hitler before his military ventures, maybe in his embryonic stage. But just think of the endless possibilities, the dangerous limits he crossed. Hitler seemed to have an unusual calling to survive and prove a point. Unfortunately, it was a point humanity really didn't need to witness. With such a dangerous role, he was obviously wounded twice. In 1916, grenade shrapnel hit his leg in the Battle of the Somme, and in October 1918 near Ypres, he was temporarily blinded by a British mustard gas attack. None of this stopped him. In fact, it fueled him. Hitler would never be the same. Funny enough, despite being awarded the Iron Cross second class in 1914, and more rarely for a corporal, the first class in 1918, he wasn't considered an exemplary soldier. It's believed some of his comrades saw him as a Schweinehund, basically a pig, lucky and eccentric. He was also teased, earning the nickname White Crow. To his peers, he was more caught up in his own thoughts than in typical soldierly pleasures. The news of Germany's surrender in November 1918, while he was recovering from blindness in a military hospital in Passwalk, was, in his own words, his turnaround moment. He cried bitterly, convincing himself of the Dolch dos Legendae, the stab in the back legend, which blamed the defeat not on military failure, but on the betrayal of civilian politicians, Marxists, and, very relevant to his ideology, the Jews. As he recovered, Hitler set more targets for himself. Now, he exchanged the resentment of not becoming an artist due to lack of talent. He wanted to prove he could change the world, to get revenge on the detractors he believed were responsible for Germany's defeat. If we're talking about the birth of evil, this is where its seed would blossom. After recovering and full of new ideas, Hitler returned to a Munich completely engulfed in the chaos of the Weimar Republic, a hotbed of revolutions and counter-revolutions. Staying in the army, he was assigned as a liaison officer and then an education officer tasked with spying on small political groups and indoctrinating soldiers against communism. In September of 1919, while investigating the tiny German Workers' Party founded by Anton Drexler, Hitler jumped into a debate and impressed Drexler with his fiery rhetoric. He was invited to join the party. Quickly, his speaking skills, initially clumsy but developed with obsessive practice in front of a mirror, became the party's main attraction. In a way, Hitler was the perfect poster boy, decorated and an agitator like no other. His phrases had a huge indoctrination effect. He discovered a talent for igniting passions, simplifying complex issues, and offering scapegoats. In 1920, the party was renamed the National Socialist German Workers' Party, adopting the swastika as its symbol and a 25-point program that mixed nationalism, anti-Semitism, and vague socialist promises. Hitler became its undisputed leader, and that's where the term Führer came from in 1921. To protect rallies and intimidate opponents, he organized stormtroopers. Inspired by Mussolini's march in Rome, he tried a coup in Munich, the Bierhall Putsch, on the 8th of November and 9 of 1923. The coup failed miserably, resulting in deaths and Hitler's arrest. Sentenced to 5 years in Landsberg prison, Hitler only served a comfortable 9 months. During that time, he dictated the first volume of Mein Kampf to his fellow prisoners Rudolf Hess and Emil Maurice. The book, a confusing mix of autobiography, racist ideology, virulent anti-Semitism, and plans for the conquest of Eastern Europe, revealed the essence of his worldview. It's not an easy read, and it's definitely not for the casually curious, but it's a great example of how radical ideas, when encouraged, gain traction. What was truly impactful about Hitler wasn't his ideas, but how he sold them. For example, this book had modest initial sales and was considered by many to be poorly written and boring. Only after Hitler's rise to power did it become a bestseller, almost a Nazi Bible. Nothing is more impactful than the stories surrounding the book and the name plastered on its cover. Freed in December 1924, Hitler found his party fragmented and banned. He dedicated himself to rebuilding it, ditching the coup tactic in favor of seizing power through legal means, exploiting the loopholes of the Weimar democracy. This was a period of internal reorganization and consolidation, establishing a hierarchical structure by strengthening regional leaders and focusing on propaganda. This would remain one of his biggest strengths. But bad luck for Hitler, the Weimar Republic actually went through a period of economic stability, offering little fertile ground for Nazi extremism. During this time, a significant figure in his personal life was his half-niece, Angela Gelly-Robbel. Hitler developed a possessive and controlling passion for her. Gelly's death by suicide in 1931 in Hitler's apartment in Munich, and with his pistol, led to speculation about his direct involvement. What is known, however, is that this episode further impacted his destructive mindset. While he was dealing with this recent trauma and trying to find ways to ascend to power, the Great Depression opened a door for Hitler. Germany was hit hard. Mass unemployment, widespread poverty, and chronic political instability. The Nazi discourse, blaming Jews, communists, and the Treaty of Versailles for the nation's woes, found increasingly receptive ears. Joseph Goebbels, a propaganda master, orchestrated a relentless campaign using modern techniques like radio, cinema, and air travel to spread the image of Hitler as Germany's savior. Nazi rallies were carefully choreographed spectacles with flags, uniforms, and fiery speeches that hypnotized the masses. The more battered they were by economic impacts, the more resentful Germany became, just like Hitler himself. Publicly, using propaganda to his advantage, the great leader of the party cultivated a public image of dedication to the nation, presenting himself as a vegetarian, teetotaler, and non-smoker. He was the perfect citizen, molded to his own ideals, but in private, he was a hypochondriac and depended on countless medications. In the 1930 elections, his party reaped the rewards of this campaign. It jumped from 12 to 107 seats in the Reichstag, becoming the second largest party. In July 1932, they reached 230 seats, the largest party, but still without an absolute majority. After a series of political intrigues and miscalculations by the conservative elite, including Franz von Papen and Kurt von Schleicher, who believed they could control Hitler and manipulate the Nazi wave, President Paul von Hindenburg reluctantly appointed Adolf Hitler Chancellor of Germany on the 30th of January, 1933. Once in power, Hitler acted quickly and brutally to dismantle democracy. Less than a month after his appointment, the Reichstag building was set on fire on the 27th of February, 1933. Blaming the communists, Hitler persuaded Hindenburg to sign the Reichstag fire decree, which suspended basic civil rights, allowing arbitrary arrests and the suppression of opposition. In the March elections, in a climate of intimidation, the Nazis got 43.9% of the votes. On the 23rd of March, with the support of the Center Party and the forced absence of communist and some social democratic deputies, the Reichstag passed the Enabling Act, granting Hitler dictatorial powers to legislate without parliament for 4 years. The Nazification of all spheres of German society began. Trade unions were dissolved, political parties banned or forced to dissolve themselves, and the press and radio were put under state control. Hitler wasted no time. He ordered the purge of the SA leadership and other political and personal opponents. Hundreds of political adversaries and army leaders were murdered. When President Hindenburg died on the 2nd of August 1934, Hitler merged the offices of Chancellor and President. The army, perfectly tailored to his interests, swore an oath of unconditional loyalty directly to Adolf Hitler. The dictatorship was complete. And it all started because a young painter couldn't draw faces, couldn't capture real expressions. Why did a young man have the rigidity of his father on one side and the excessive zeal of his mother on the other? Maybe it's too simple to attribute such simplistic reasons to the monsters of our history. But his story doesn't end with the dictatorship in full swing. His plan was only partially completed. Hitler wanted a bigger piece of the pie. With absolute control, he began transforming Germany into a totalitarian and militarized state state preparing for war and racial expansion. The Nuremberg Laws of 1935 institutionalized anti-Semitism, stripping Jews of German citizenship and prohibiting marriages and relations between Jews and Aryans, as they said in Nazi propaganda. Massive rearmament and the reintroduction of compulsory military service in blatant violation of the Treaty of Versailles boosted the economy and reduced unemployment, increasing the dictator's popularity. In 1936, he took a risk by remilitarizing the Rhineland, encountering little resistance from Western powers. The Berlin Olympic Games that same year were a propaganda spectacle, projecting an image of a peaceful and efficient Germany while internal persecution intensified. Hitler had an obsession with monumental architecture, planning with his favorite architect, Albert Speer, the reconstruction of Berlin as Germania, the world capital of the Thousand-Year Reich. It was clear to the world now that this dictator was not like the others. He wanted to control the world, molded in his own image and likeness. He wanted to play God. Then, World War II happened, and the first years of the war were marked by Germany's overwhelming victories. Poland, Denmark, Norway, Netherlands, Belgium, Luxembourg, and most surprisingly, France in 1940. Hitler seemed invincible. The Battle of Britain, however, stopped the Luftwaffe and prevented an invasion. In June 1941, Hitler made his biggest strategic mistake, the invasion of the Soviet Union, opening a vast eastern front. Alongside the war of conquest, the war of racial extermination intensified. Extermination squads murdered Jews, communists, and others considered undesirable en masse in the occupied territories of the East. At the Wannsee Conference in January 1942, the final solution to the Jewish question was coordinated: the systematic genocide of European Jews through deportations, through extermination camps like Auschwitz-Birkenau or Treblinka in Sobibor. From 1943, a year after the conference and Hitler declaring war against the United States, leading to new alliances, Germany was on the defensive on all fronts. Allied bombings devastated German cities. On the 6th of June, 1944, D-Day, the Allies landed in Normandy, opening the long-awaited Second Front in Western Europe. On the 20th of July, 1944, Hitler narrowly survived an assassination attempt in the July 20 plot, when Colonel Klaus von Stauffenberg detonated a bomb in his headquarters in East Prussia, the Wolf's Lair. The repression that followed was savage, with thousands of suspects executed. Hitler, increasingly isolated and paranoid, refused to accept the reality of imminent defeat, pinning his hopes on V-1 and V-2 missiles to turn the tide of the war. His Parkinson's symptoms became more evident. Adolf Hitler's last days were spent inside an underground complex beneath the Reich Chancellery in Berlin. It was a dark, claustrophobic world where an aging Hitler, surrounded by his last loyal followers, issued increasingly delusional orders for armies that no longer existed, blaming generals, the German people, and, as always, the Jews, for the catastrophe. In a final twisted show of loyalty, or perhaps resignation, his longtime companion, Eva Braun, joined him in the bunker. In the early hours of the 29th of April, 1945, with Soviet troops just blocks away, Hitler dictated his political and private will, expelling former party comrades for treason and naming Admiral Karl Donitz as his successor. On the afternoon of the 30th of April, 1945, after saying goodbye to his staff, Adolf Hitler and Eva Braun retreated to their quarters. Eva ingested cyanide. Hitler did the same, but also used a pistol to finish it. Their bodies, as per his instructions, were taken to the Chancellery Garden, drenched in gasoline and burned. The Soviets later confirmed their identities. Adolf Hitler left behind a ruined Europe, tens of millions dead, and the trauma of the Holocaust that still haunts survivors and victims' families to this day. The Nuremberg trials sought to hold the main Nazi war criminals accountable, but the question of how one man and one ideology could lead a civilized nation to such barbarity continues to haunt human consciousness. They say Germany is still ashamed of what happened there. Many still struggle to bury the painful memories. But one thing is for sure, it's hard to hide, no matter how much we try. If we don't talk about the past, it tends to repeat itself.